The sea did not give back what it took. Every soul on the Black Shale Coast knew that law better than they knew their own names, until the night a mute scavenger girl broke it. She had gone to the tide pools for shellfish, for anything that might keep her belly quiet one more day, and instead found a king half-drowned among the wreckage of black rock, his lungs full of salt, his massive body already cooling toward death. She had no voice to call for help. She had only her thin arms, a rope of kelp, and a stubbornness sharpened by a lifetime of being overlooked. She saved him. And now his pack had come to hunt her down the cliffs for the crime of touching what did not belong to her, for the crime of stealing their alpha from the deep. She could not scream her innocence. She could not beg. She could only run and hope that the same silence that had always made her invisible might, this once, keep her alive. Chapter 1. The storm had gutted the coast for 3 days before it finally broke, and Ren Ashcombe went out onto the rocks the moment the wind allowed it, because hunger did not wait for calm seas. She moved low and quick along the tide-scoured shelves of black stone, her bare feet finding purchase in cracks she'd memorized since childhood, her woven basket bumping against her hip. The storm always brought good scavenging, shellfish flung loose from deeper beds, driftwood worth trading, sometimes coin from a wrecked ship if the gods were feeling cruel to somebody else for once. Ren didn't pray for wrecks. She only knew what came after them, and she had long since stopped feeling guilty for taking what the sea discarded. She smelled it before she saw it. Salt, yes, and rot, and under that, blood. Not fish blood. Something heavier, more animal, threaded through with an unfamiliar musk that made the fine hairs on her arms lift, though she couldn't have said why. She rounded the last outcrop and stopped. He lay half in the surf, half out, a mountain of a man flung across the black rock like something the storm had personally decided to punish. Even unconscious, even gray-lipped and still, there was nothing small about him. Shoulders that could have carried the weight of the cliff itself, forearms corded with muscle beneath skin gone cold, dark hair plastered flat with brine. A tear in his side, deep and ugly, had bled out across the stone in a stain the tide hadn't quite reached to wash away. Ren's first instinct, the one honed by years of surviving on nothing, was to look for what she could take. Boots. A blade at his hip, still sheathed. Anything of value on a corpse was fair game in her world, and this man looked very much like a corpse. Then his chest moved. Just barely. A shallow, catching hitch like a door swollen shut trying to open. She should have walked away. She told herself that later, over and over, in the only language she had left. The frantic shorthand of her hands, the words that never came. She should have taken the boots and left the rest to the gulls. Instead she dropped to her knees beside him, pressed her ear to that vast, unmoving chest, and heard a heartbeat so faint and so slow it felt like listening to something already halfway into the next world. She didn't know then what she was pulling out of the sea. She only knew a man was drowning in air, and that some old, stubborn thing in her refused to let it happen while she had 2 working hands. It took her the better part of an hour to drag him clear of the tide line, her muscles screaming, her palms tearing on barnacles she didn't feel until later. She packed the wound in his side with the bitter moss that grew in the cliff shadows. She'd learned that trick from her grandmother, before her grandmother had died and left her alone with a silence no one else in the village could stand to be around. She forced seawater from his lungs the way she'd once done for a drowning dog, turning him onto his side, striking his back until he coughed and retched and finally dragged in one long ragged breath on his own. His eyes opened. They were gold. Not brown gold, not hazel. Gold like a coin held up to firelight, gold like something that did not belong to any man she had ever seen. They found her face and held there, unfocused, glassy with pain, and for one suspended moment Ren felt something pass between them that she had no word for and no voice to give it even if she had. Then his eyes rolled back and he went under again, into whatever dark water of unconsciousness had been holding him. She should have run then. Instead she stayed with him until the sun began to sink, feeding him what fresh water she carried in her skin, keeping the wound packed, watching his ragged breathing even out by degrees. She didn't know he was a king. She didn't know what waited at the top of the cliffs, moving down toward the shore in a silent, furious column of grief and rage. She only knew that something enormous and wounded had washed up in her small, hungry life, and that leaving it to die had never, not once, been a real option. By the time she heard the first howl roll down from the headland, a sound that split the evening air like a blade through cloth, it was already too late to decide differently. The howl multiplied. One voice became 5, became a dozen, a chorus of grief and fury rolling down the cliff path toward the shore, and Ren's whole body went cold with an instinct older than thought. Run. She had survived 15 years in Blackshale Village on instinct alone. The instinct of the voiceless who cannot call for help and so must never be caught somewhere help is needed. She looked once more at the man on the rocks, his color better now, his breathing steadier, and made the calculation every scavenger makes in the space of a heartbeat. He will live without me now or he will not live at all, and either way I cannot be here when they arrive. She was wrong about the timing. She'd barely scrambled 10 feet up the rock face when the first of them crested the ridge. A woman, tall and terrible, her eyes flooded amber, moving with a speed no human body should own. Behind her came more, shapes blurring at the edges as if they couldn't decide whether to stay men or become something else entirely. Ren had heard the stories the same way every coastal child heard them, half warning and half lullaby. Don't wander past the tree line at the full moon. Don't take what belongs to the pack. She had never quite believed them the way she believed hunger or cold or the ache of an empty basket. He believed them now. The woman, later Ren would learn her name was Sable, the Alpha's second, reached the shoreline and let out a sound that was not human at all, a keening cry that broke apart into words only at the very end. Here. He's here. They swarmed the king's body with a desperation that had nothing performative in it. Ren, frozen halfway up the rock face, watched hands, too many hands, all of them shaking, check his pulse, his wound, the packed moss she'd pressed into the gash at his side. She watched confusion ripple through them as they registered that someone had already tended him. That someone had saved him. Then the gold eyes among them turned toward the cliffs. Toward her. There, a man snarled and pointed. Ren did not have the luxury of explaining herself even to those who could hear a voice. She had none. She turned and climbed, fast and low, the way she'd climbed since childhood, boots long since abandoned in favor of the sure grip of bare feet. And behind her the pack came on with a speed that made the cliffs themselves seem to shrink. They caught her before she'd gone a quarter mile. It was not Sable who cornered her first, in the crumbling shell of an old fisherman's cottage half swallowed by dune grass and thyme, walls gone soft and green with salt rot, a doorway with no door left to close. It was the king himself. He should not have been able to move. Ren knew that with the certainty of someone who had just spent an hour dragging his near-dead body up a beach. And yet there he stood, filling the broken doorway, his wound still dark against his side, his massive frame swaying with the effort of simply remaining upright. And his gold eyes were the most terrifying thing she had ever seen, because they were not glazed with pain anymore. They were entirely, coldly lucid. He did not shout. He didn't need to. His voice, when it came, was a low rumble that seemed to vibrate up through the floor and into her bones. You took something that isn't yours to take. Ren pressed herself back against the crumbling wall, her chest heaving, and did the only thing she could do. She lifted her hands, bloodied, barnacle-torn, and began to move them, fast and desperate, the sign language of her own invention that no one outside her dead grandmother had ever bothered to learn. I didn't take you. I found you dying. He watched her hands the way a man watches a language he half recognizes and cannot place, brow furrowing, and something in his expression shifted from fury toward something far more dangerous, curiosity. You can't speak, he said. Not a question. A realization, arriving slow and heavy, the way understanding does when a man has spent the last hour convinced he was hunting a thief and is only now beginning to suspect he is looking at something else entirely. Ren's hands stilled. She nodded once, sharp, defiant despite the way her whole body trembled. Behind him, in the tall grass beyond the ruined cottage, she heard the pack arriving. A dozen sets of footsteps, a dozen throats still thick with the echo of that terrible howl, all of them hungry for someone to blame for the day their king had nearly died in the sea. The Alpha King did not turn to look at them. He kept his gold eyes on her face, on her frantic, silent hands, and something in his stance, some ancient, immovable thing, shifted subtly to place his own body between her and the doorway. Chapter 3. Fenwick. Sable's voice cracked through the ruined cottage like a whip, and she shouldered past two warriors to reach the doorway, her amber eyes wide with a fury barely leashed. Move aside. That is the girl who dragged you off the rocks. Half the coast smells it on her, your blood is on her hands. Step aside and let us finish this. Ren's pulse hammered so hard she could feel it behind her eyes. Sable did not look at her the way the king had. Sable looked at her the way a starving wolf looks at meat. Already decided, already grieving, already certain of the shape this ended in. Half the coast smells my blood on her hands, the king said without turning, because she packed the wound herself. With witch moss. The same moss my mother used to use. He said it flatly, almost to himself, as though only now assembling the pieces of what had happened to him on that beach. I did not drown, Sable. I was drowning. There's a difference, and it happens to be the entire difference between an execution and a debt. The warriors behind Sable shifted, uneasy. Ren understood, even without hearing the argument fully translated in her head. She understood the shape of doubt moving through a crowd that had arrived certain of blood and was now being asked to reconsider. She's mute, the king added, and something in his voice when he said it made Ren's stomach twist strangely, not with fear this time. She hasn't said a word in her own defense because she cannot. And still she stayed with me on those rocks long enough to pull the water from my lungs. His gold eyes flicked briefly back to her. That's not the behavior of a thief, Sable. That's the behavior of someone with more mercy in her than sense. Mercy doesn't explain how you ended up on the rocks half dead in the first place, Sable snapped, and there finally was the real wound beneath the fury. Not suspicion of Ren at all, but raw, unspent terror for a king they had all believed lost to the deep. We searched the whole coast, Fenric. We thought you were gone. The king, Fenric, Ren repeated silently, tasting the shape of the name in her mind since her mouth would never get the chance, was silent a long moment. When he spoke again his voice had gentled, though it lost none of its weight. I was ambushed off Thorn Point. Silver hooks, weighted lines. Someone wanted a king's body to wash up quietly and no witnesses left standing to say otherwise. His jaw tightened. That is the hunt we should be running, Sable. Not this one. The word ambush moved through the gathered pack like a current, warriors exchanging glances, the bloodlust in the air shifting texture, curdling into something colder and more purposeful. Ren watched it happen and understood, even without every word, that the danger aimed at her throat had just found a new, more deserving target. It did not mean she was safe. Sable's eyes still cut to her, still weighed her, still calculated whether a mute scavenger girl standing this close to a king who had nearly died was a coincidence anyone should trust. She stays under guard, Sable said finally, biting the words out like a concession she despised making. Until we know more. I won't have the pack whispering that our alpha was seduced into mercy by a pretty face that can't even explain herself. Fenric's gold eyes darkened at that. Not agreement, Ren thought, but something closer to warning, though he said nothing to contradict the order. He only turned to her, and for the first time since she had dragged him gasping out of the tide, he inclined his head, slow and deliberate, in something that might in another life have been a bow. You'll come with us, he said. Not a command exactly. Something gentler though no less immovable. Whatever you are, girl, thief or savior, I intend to find out. And I don't intend to let anyone put a blade through you before I do. Ren's hands rose, trembling, to sign the only thing she had left. I only wanted you to breathe. He watched her fingers move, and though she was certain he understood none of it, something in his gaze told her he had heard it anyway. Chapter 4. They kept her in the old net house at the edge of the pack's shorefront hall. Not a cell exactly, though the door locked from the outside and a guard sat within earshot day and night. Ren spent the first 2 days in silence that felt, ironically, no different from every other day of her life, except that this silence was watched, weighed, suspicious of her in a way the villages had never bothered to be. In Black Shale she had been invisible. Here she was a puzzle someone intended to solve. And puzzles she was learning could be dangerous things to be. It was on the third evening that Alaric came. He introduced himself as the king's cousin, second in the bloodline, and his smile was the kind Ren had learned early to distrust. Warm on the surface, calculating underneath, like sun on water hiding a current that could pull a swimmer under before they noticed the pull at all. He brought her bread, real bread, softer than anything she'd eaten in months, and he sat across from her on an overturned crate with the easy grace of a man who had never once doubted his own welcome anywhere. You've caused quite a stir, he said, watching her eat with an attentiveness that made her skin prickle. The Alpha hasn't left his chambers to address the council in 2 days. Very unlike him. Some say you've bewitched him. Ren's hands stilled over the bread. She shook her head, slow and firm. No, I don't think you have either, Alaric said easily, as though her denial confirmed some private theory rather than answering the accusation. I think he's simply grateful. Kings are, sometimes, when they've been reminded they can die like anyone else. He tilted his head, considering her. It was very brave of you, dragging him from the water. Most would have run. She lifted her hands. I only did what anyone would. Not true, Alaric said before she'd even finished the gesture, which unsettled her more than if he'd simply failed to understand it, as though he'd anticipated the shape of her answer before her fingers formed it. Most would have taken his boots and left him for the tide. You know that as well as I do. His smile didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. I'd like to help you if I can. The council doesn't trust silence, you understand. Silence looks like secrets to men who've spent their lives reading faces for lies. If you had someone to speak for you, to vouch formally before the pack, this could all end much faster. Ren studied him. She could not have said in words what unsettled her about the offer, only that it sat wrong in her chest the way spoiled meat sits wrong on the tongue before the mind has caught up to name the rot. She signed carefully. Why would you help me? Because my cousin's judgment has been questionable since the moment you pulled him out of that surf, Alaric said, and for just a flicker, the warmth in his voice thinned to something colder before he caught it and smoothed it back over. I'd rather see this resolved cleanly, quietly, before it becomes something the whole coast whispers about. He stood, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. Think on it, little scavenger. I'll come again tomorrow. He left her with the bread and a feeling she couldn't shake, that whatever game was being played in this hall, she had just been offered a seat at a table set by someone who intended, eventually, to eat her. She did not have long to sit with the unease before the door opened again, past midnight this time, and it was Fenric who filled the frame. No guard beside him, his wound bound now beneath a fresh shirt, his gold eyes catching what little lamplight the room held. He did not sit on the crate Alaric had used. He crouched instead, bringing himself down to her level, an oddly humbling gesture from a man who could have simply loomed. My cousin came to see you, he said. Not a question. Ren nodded. What did he offer? She hesitated, then signed, slow enough that he might catch the shape of it even without knowing the language properly. To speak for me. Before the council. Fenric's jaw tightened, something dark moving behind his gold eyes that had nothing to do with her. Alaric doesn't do anything without calculating what it cost him to lose and what it gains him to win. He studied her face a long moment, and Ren felt that same strange tethered feeling from the beach. The sense of being seen fully for the first time in longer than she could remember. Don't sign anything he asks you to. Don't agree to anything with him as witness. Do you understand? She nodded, slower this time, turning the warning over. She didn't know yet what game Alaric played, or why the king's own blood unsettled him more than a pack of warriors baying for her execution had. But she believed him. Something in her, something that had recognized him even half-drowned and glassy-eyed on the rocks, believed him without needing a reason handed to her in words. Chapter 5. The council convened at dawn, in the great stone hall that Ren had only glimpsed through narrow windows until now, and she was brought before it not as a guest but as an accusation given a body to stand in. The hall was vast, black-timbered, lit by torches that guttered against a salt wind sneaking through every gap in the old walls. A dozen pack elders sat along a raised dais, Sable among them, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable now in a way that felt worse than open hostility. Fenric sat at the center, and beside him, a half-step closer than protocol seemed to allow, stood Alaric, his hand resting with easy familiarity on the back of the Alpha's chair, as though he'd already decided how this story would be told and simply needed the room to catch up. The girl cannot speak in her own defense, the eldest councilman said, his voice dry as driftwood. How then are we to judge her intentions? She can, Alaric said smoothly before anyone else could answer, through gesture. I've spent some hours with her these past 2 days. I believe I've come to understand her meaning well enough to translate if the council permits. Ren's stomach dropped. She had signed nothing to him beyond what Fenric had warned her against, but Alaric's confidence carried the room the way confidence always did, filling silence with a shape no one thought to question. Fenric's gold eyes cut sideways, sharp and sudden. Since when do you speak her language, cousin? Since it became necessary, Alaric said, unbothered, and turned to the council. She has told me, through gesture, through the shape of her fear when I ask certain questions, That she found the alpha already unconscious. That she meant no harm. But she has also indicated. He paused, letting the pause do its work. That she recognized his rank before she acted. That she knew exactly what she was pulling from the water, and chose to do so regardless of the danger to herself, hoping for reward. A murmur went through the hall, ugly and quick, the word reward landing like a stone into still water. Ren's hands flew up frantic, shaking her head so hard her vision blurred. No, that's not what I... But no one in the hall could read her hands except one man, and Fenric had gone very still, his gaze fixed not on Alaric but on her, watching her fingers move with an intensity that suggested he was trying desperately to catch meaning he had no formal claim to understand. She denies it, he said finally low. Of course she denies it now, Alaric said, spreading his hands, the picture of reluctant reasonableness. Cousin, I understand the debt you feel. I understand what it is to owe your life to a stranger's hands. But debt clouds judgment, and this council cannot set precedent on a king's gratitude alone. If she manipulated circumstance to secure your favor. She dragged me a quarter-mile up wet rock with a torn side and half my blood already in the sea, Fenric said, and his voice had dropped into something that made the torches along the wall seem to gutter lower, before she knew whether I would live long enough to reward anyone for anything. I remember more of that beach than you credit me for, Alaric. I remember gold eyes, and I remember hands too small to be dragging a body my size, and I remember thinking in whatever fog death leaves a man in, that no thief bothers packing witch moss into a wound she means to leave to rot. The hall had gone utterly silent. Sable, Ren noticed, was no longer looking at her with suspicion but at Alaric. A slow, dawning calculation crossing her face. The same unease Ren had felt in the net house, finally finding a mirror in someone with a voice loud enough to matter. Cousin, Fenric said again, softer now and far more dangerous for it, how did you come to spend hours with a girl under guard, learning a language none of my scouts report ever hearing you study before? Alaric's smile did not waver. But something behind his eyes did. Just barely, just enough. And Ren, watching with the same desperate attention she'd give any predator circling close enough to matter, understood that whatever quiet war had begun in this hall was no longer about her at all. It was about who had truly meant for a king to drown off Thorn Point, and who had been counting all this time on the sea keeping its secrets. Before we go further, if you're enjoying this one, make sure you're subscribed to Kazia's Romance Library, because this is exactly the kind of slow burn, fated mate story we tell here every single day. Drop a like and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now back to Ren and the king, who is only just beginning to realize how much he owes her. Chapter 6. The council did not rule that day. Fenric adjourned it himself, his voice carrying the particular stillness of a man who trusted nothing anymore, not even the shape of his own certainty. And Ren was returned to the net house with a guard doubled at the door and a question burning under her ribs that she had no way to ask anyone but him. He came again after moonrise, alone, and this time he did not crouch at a careful distance. He sat directly across from her on the packed earth floor, close enough that she could smell him properly for the first time since the beach. Cedar and salt and something underneath both. A low, banked heat like embers, like the last warmth left in a hearth after the fire's gone out. It struck her strangely that she recognized it. That some animal part of her, some part she had never had reason to trust before, had catalogued that scent on the rocks while he was dying and kept it, the way a hand keeps the shape of a key it's held only once. Alaric lied, he said without preamble. About the language. About what you supposedly told him. I don't know yet why, but I mean to find out, and I need your help doing it. Ren tilted her head and signed slow. How can I help you if no one but you understands me? Teach me, he said. Properly. Not fragments guessed it across a locked door. I want to understand you, Ren. Her name in his mouth landed like something he'd been saving. Not translated through anyone else's ambition. She stared at him a long moment, and something in her chest, some old careful wall built brick by brick out of every year no one had bothered to learn her silence, cracked just slightly, just enough to let warmth through. She began with her name sign, the one her grandmother had given her. 2 fingers drawn down from the temple like a wren's wing folding. He copied it, clumsy at first, and she almost laughed. A strange, silent shake of her shoulders that made his gold eyes soften in a way that undid her more than any spoken kindness ever had. They worked until the lamp guttered low. Simple words. Water. Danger. Trust. His hands were enormous, scarred, entirely unsuited to the careful small movements her language demanded, and yet he tried over and over, correcting himself when she shook her head, laughing, actually laughing low and rough, like a man rediscovering a sound he'd forgotten he owned, when he got cedar and danger confused and signed, quite by accident, that he found himself dangerous. That one might be accurate anyway, he admitted, and the look he gave her then was not the look of a king weighing a prisoner. It was the look of a man who had gone looking for a thief and found instead something he had no framework yet to name, only an old, wordless certainty settling into his blood like the tide finally finding its proper shore. It was near dawn when his hand, reaching to correct the shape of her fingers around the sign for safe, brushed the torn, half-healed skin of her palm, the barnacle wounds from dragging him up the rocks, still raw beneath the salve Sable had grudgingly allowed her. The moment skin met skin, something happened that neither of them could mistake for accident. It was not pain exactly. It was recognition. A jolt that ran the length of Ren's arm and settled, impossibly, somewhere behind her sternum, warm and enormous and utterly unfamiliar, like a door long swollen shut suddenly swinging open on oiled hinges. She gasped, a real sound, rare and involuntary, the closest thing to a voice she had made in years. And across from her Fenric went rigid, his gold eyes blowing wide, his breath catching audibly in his throat. "No," he said low, almost to himself, disbelieving. "No, that's not possible. Not with a human girl who dragged me off a beach 3 days ago." But his hand had not let go of hers, and beneath his palm she could feel his pulse hammering, fast and hard, matched, she realized with a strange dropping lurch, to the exact rhythm of her own. Chapter 7. He told her what it meant with his hands still shaking, in words she had to piece together half from his mouth and half from the desperate, unpracticed signs he'd only just learned that night. "Mate," he managed, clumsy, and then, when her face went blank with incomprehension, simply pressed his palm to his chest, over his heart and then to hers, over the place her own heart hammered in answer. "The bond doesn't lie," he said. "It doesn't care what you are or what I am or what any council thinks is proper. It only recognizes this." He gestured, helpless, at the space between them, at the way the air itself seemed to have thickened, charged, since their skin had touched. "I have spent 30 years being told my mate would be a wolf of noble blood. I did not expect a mute scavenger girl to prove every one of them wrong." Ren's hands trembled as she signed. "This makes things worse. Not better." He huffed something that wasn't quite a laugh. "You have no idea." He was right to worry. Within a day, word of the bond had slipped past the locked door of the net house the way water always finds its crack, and the pack that had come baying for her blood now watched her differently, not less suspicious, but suspicious in a new, more dangerous key, the kind reserved for something that threatens to reshape the whole order of things. Sable's unease had sharpened into something Ren almost read as protective, watching Alaric now with the flat, assessing stare of a wolf who has finally scented the wrong animal in the fold. But others in the hall, Alaric's allies, she understood now, a faction she had not known existed until the shape of it began closing around her like a net drawn tight, looked at her the way men look at an obstacle. It was Alaric who came to her that evening, and for the first time he did not bother with warmth at all. "A bond," he said, standing just inside the doorway, not bothering to sit. "How convenient. How very, very convenient, that a girl found alone with a half-drowned king happens days later to discover she's his fated mate. Tell me, scavenger, did you know before you pulled him from the water or only after, once you understood exactly what fortune you'd hauled up onto the rocks?" Ren's hands rose, furious, sharp. "I didn't know anything. I only wanted him to breathe." "No one will believe that," Alaric said, and for the first time she heard, beneath the smoothness, the raw edge of a man whose own careful plans had just been upended by something he could not control or discredit. "A bond can be forced, girl. Did you know that? Old blood magic, the kind practiced by those willing to trade a soul for a throne. If someone wanted to ensure a king's gratitude curdled into obsession, a false bond, cultivated in the moment of his greatest vulnerability, while he lay dying and unable to resist." He let the accusation hang there, poison dressed as concern, and Ren understood with a cold, sick lurch exactly what he intended, not merely to discredit her but to turn the bond itself, the one true, undeniable thing that had happened to her in this entire nightmare, into evidence of her guilt. "You will not win this," she signed, though she had no certainty he could follow it. Only the desperate need to say something even into silence. I already have, Alaric said softly, and left her with the door locked and her heart hammering with a fear that had nothing this time to do with any bond at all. That night the ambush came. Wren woke to the smell of smoke and the muffled sound of struggle beyond her door. The guard, she would learn later, taken by surprise, silver-edged blade at his throat before he'd even drawn his own. The door burst inward, not with Fenric's broad shoulders but with 3 masked men, and Wren had half a second to understand, with the particular clarity terror sometimes grants, that this was not an execution ordered by the council. This was Alaric cutting his losses, removing the inconvenient girl before her bond to the king could be used against whatever scheme he'd built. She fought. She had never in her life had reason to learn how, and she fought anyway, with teeth and nails and the heavy iron lamp hook that had sat unused in the corner of the net house for longer than she'd been a prisoner in it, and she screamed. A real scream, torn raw and voiceless from a throat that had forgotten how, more breath than sound, but loud enough. Loud enough that Fenric heard it from across the shorefront hall, and came through the door not as a man but as something closer to the wolf beneath his skin, gold eyes gone entirely feral. And what followed in the net house was short and brutal, and ended with Alaric's men bleeding on the packed earth floor and Wren pressed hard against Fenric's chest, shaking, his hand fisted so tight in her hair it should have hurt and didn't, his whole body a wall between her and anything that might ever try to reach her again. Mine, he said into her hair, rough and shaking and absolutely certain, the one word she had learned to read on his mouth without needing any sign at all. Whatever the council decides, whatever Alaric schemes, you are mine, and I will burn this coast to ash before I let anyone take you from me twice. Chapter 8. The council convened again at dawn, not by Fenric's summons this time but by Sable's, who arrived at the shorefront hall with 3 of Alaric's own men bound and bruised behind her, and a ledger clutched in her hand that she set down on the dais with the particular violence of a woman who had spent days doubting her own instincts and was done doubting them now. I searched Alaric's chambers after the attack, she said, before anyone could ask permission to speak, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast torchlit hall. This is a record of payments. Silver hooks, weighted lines, purchased from a smuggler out of Thorn Point 3 weeks before our Alpha was found half-drowned on the rocks. She flipped the ledger open, her hand steady though her voice was not. And this, a second entry dated 2 days after we recovered him. Payment to 3 men. Described only as removal of the complication. The hall erupted. Wren, standing at Fenric's side, his hand at the small of her back, unwilling, she understood now, to ever again let more than a few inches separate them, watched Alaric's face across the room, watched the smooth, warm mask finally, fully slip. Lies, he said, but the word came out thin, unconvincing, drowned beneath the rising fury of a council that had trusted him for years and now saw, laid bare in his own ledger's careful hand, the shape of a cousin who had tried to drown his king in the sea and when that failed tried to murder the girl who'd pulled him back out of it. You could not simply challenge me for the throne, Fenric said, and his voice had gone very quiet, very cold. Colder than Wren had heard it even in the net house, colder than fury, the voice of a man doing arithmetic on exactly how much betrayal a single bloodline could hold. You had to remove me first. And when that failed, when a mute scavenger girl succeeded where your silver hooks did not, you decided she was the more convenient death. Easier to explain than a king's murder. Easier still if you could paint her as the schemer and let the pack do your killing for you. She is nothing, Alaric spat, the mask gone entirely now, ugliness bare beneath it. A voiceless nobody from a fishing village, and you would set her above bloodlines that have served this pack for generations for the crime of finding you first. She did not find me first, Fenric said. She is the only one who found me at all. While my own blood was busy calculating how best to profit from my death, a girl with nothing to gain and everything to lose dragged me out of the sea with her bare hands and packed my wound with the same moss my mother used to use, because some old forgotten kindness in her refused to leave anything to drown while she had the strength to stop it. He turned then to the full council, and Wren felt the weight of every eye in the hall land on her at once. That is not a schemer. That is a Luna. The word landed in the hall like a struck bell. Wren's hands rose instinctively, the old habit of a lifetime. I am not that, I am only. But Fenric caught her wrist gently and held it and shook his head, and something in his gold eyes told her that whatever protest she meant to sign, he did not intend to let her finish it. Chapter 9. Alaric was dragged from the hall in chains before the sun had fully cleared the headland, his sentence carried by a council no longer divided, exile beyond the coast's furthest borders, his name struck from the bloodline rolls, his silver-purchased treachery laid bare for every pack from Blackshale to Thorn Point to hear and remember. He did not go quietly. He went screaming accusations that no one in that hall believed anymore, his voice fading into the wind off the cliffs until it was only gulls again, only the old, indifferent sea taking back one more thing that had tried to cheat it. Wren stood at the cliff's edge afterward, watching the small dark shape of him diminish along the coast road under armed escort, and felt Fenric come up behind her before she heard him. She had learned in these last days to feel his approach the way she felt weather changing, some low pressure in the air that was entirely, uniquely his. He did not speak at first. He simply stood beside her, close enough that his shoulder brushed hers, and together they watched the tide come in over the black rocks where all of this had begun. "The council has ratified the bond," he said finally. "Formally. Which means, before you ask," his mouth curved, warm, "that no one on this coast will ever again be permitted to call you thief or scavenger, or anything but what you are." She turned to face him and signed, slow and careful, the shape of a question she had been holding since the net house. "And what is that?" He answered her not with hands. His signing had improved in these days, but some things he had told her once deserved a voice even when hers could not give one back. But by drawing her against his chest, his heartbeat hammering under her ear in that same matched, impossible rhythm, and murmuring the word into her hair. "Mine," he said. "My Luna. My mate. The only reason I am standing on this cliff at all instead of resting at the bottom of the sea." He drew back just enough to look at her properly, gold eyes bright with something that had chased every last shadow of fury and grief from them. "The pack will hold a claiming ceremony at the next full moon. The proper kind, before witnesses, with every honor a king owes the woman who saved his life and then had the audacity to become his soul besides. But I find I don't want to wait that long to tell you something." She tilted her head, waiting. "I love you," he said simply. "Not because the bond demands it. Because you sat with a dying stranger on cold rocks and refused to leave, when leaving would have cost you nothing and staying nearly cost you everything. I would have found my way to loving you eventually, Wren, bond or no bond. The sea simply saved us both some time." Her hands rose, and this time she did not sign the things she couldn't say, the things too large for gesture. She simply pressed her palm flat against his chest, over the heartbeat that had first betrayed them both, and let him read there, in the tremor of her own pulse beneath his hand, everything her voice had never been given the chance to say. Behind them, the shorefront hall glowed gold with torchlight against the coming dusk, and somewhere in its rafter Sable was already, loudly, planning a ceremony no one on that coast would ever forget. Below them, the tide turned as it always did, indifferent to kings and scavengers alike. Except that this once, just this once, it had given something back instead of only taking. Fenric pressed his lips to her temple, to the crown of her head and finally, softly, to her mouth, and Wren, who had spent her whole life being the quiet thing at the edge of every room, found that some truths did not need a voice at all to be heard. If you're loving this one, don't forget to hit subscribe here on Kazia's Romance Library. We bring you a brand new fated mate story just like this every single day, and trust me, you don't want to miss the next one. Thank you for listening to this story. Please like, share and comment where you are watching from, and also don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories like this every day. Thank you and God bless you as you do.